Landing on the Mun is one of my favorite things to do in Kerbal Space Program, and doing it in an Apollo style is my preferred method. What that means is having a separate lander that will detach from the service module in lunar orbit, land on the surface, and rendezvous back with the service module before heading back to Kerbin. The ship you see me building right now ended up being a bit over-engineered for this, but I think it still looks pretty cool. Also, I forgot a few things, so even though it looks cool, it's not incredibly functional. If you're completely new to the game, I recommend starting in sandbox mode and just playing around with the rocket parts until you can get into orbit. If you've already landed on the Mun but haven't tried rendezvous and docking yet, or vice versa, then this is a great mission to try. If you're playing in career and science mode, a direct descent vehicle might be better due to the low tech. So right now you can see me adding the landing legs to the craft. I'm going to end up removing them later because I think it's a bit too big. Also, again, way over-engineered. It doesn't need that much fuel. You might have noticed I forgot the heat shield. That'll come up later. And I also forgot the parachutes. I didn't forget batteries though. You might have noticed me, or maybe I haven't done that yet. Yeah, I'm just doing it now. Can't tell I'm watching back the recording of me playing. Solar panels going on now. So yeah, Mun missions are my favorite. They're super quick. I did this whole thing, including building it in just 1 hour. And all the Kerbals got back home safely. Spoiler alert. Adding the launch escape mechanism, completely unnecessary given you can just, revert the flight. But it does look cool. And here you can see me building the lifting part of the craft. I thought that looked way too wide, so I ended up removing that. And that just looked ridiculous. And yeah, I don't like... I think the Falcon 9 looks cool, but I don't really like these fairings that get wider before they get thinner. That's why I removed the landing legs. You can see that now. Just make those, smaller. So it'll all fit inside that 3.75 meter fairing. Almost added more fuel. Would have been completely unnecessary, as we'll see later. And yeah, that fairing looks way better. At least to me. Now adding the fuel. Yeah, it looks good. I wish they had a little piece like that, like the Saturn V engine plate for the 3.75 meter, because I think it would just work so well. I don't always like the way just engines sticking out the bottom look, so I added that fairing. This does mess up the aerodynamics. I think it doesn't calculate it right or something and adds a lot of drag, but this thing has enough fuel to get into orbit, even with more drag. And I added these wings. Just looks cool. One more thing, adding another stage just to get us into orbit. That will be necessary, as we'll see in just a second. Now, gotta turn the gimbal down on those vector engines because they are super twitchy, and also add some elevons to the wings just for more control. Also doing the actions to get rid of that launch escape system. Oh, and also struts, so this thing doesn't fall apart completely. So, we're about to launch. Oh yeah, elevons. And the ascent on this thing, first of all, this vector engine's super OP, super powerful, had to turn it down. You don't want to go too fast before you clear, a lot of atmosphere. Otherwise, you're just wasting your delta V on the air. So you want to, can't really see the nav ball very well, but you want to be pointing like this much at this time, so yeah, not a very good tip, I guess. Anyway, this engine's going to take a long time to burn, very efficient, and we're just very slowly turning until we can get into orbit. But, as we'll see, this engine is actually not enough to just get us into orbit on its own. It's just barely not enough. So we will get rid of the fairing. And if you can't see in the bottom left, you can see our periapse is still not orbital yet. So we're gonna have to do this quick. We don't have to do it so quick, we have a lot of time, but it's not exactly safe. If the engine failed, these guys would all die. Well, maybe not. KSP's, atmospheric effects are very forgiving. So here's a part I forgot. I did not add any reaction control system to this thing. Luckily, the command pods come with reaction wheels, and I didn't want to risk, firing our engines into the lander, so I had Jebediah get out and just push the thing. So, not the most elegant solution, but it will work, and I don't know, I thought it was pretty cool anyway. So, once you've pretty much done everything in this game, you just gotta make your own fun, fixing your own mistakes, really. And now that it's attached, he will get back in, and the camera is glitching out completely because he's just on the threshold of being orbital. Once he boards, we will turn and make sure our staging is correct first of all. And you'll notice I disabled the crossfeed. Now that should have not let fuel go between the lander and the service module, but as we'll see later, it actually did. Maybe I read it wrong and I enabled it when it was already disabled. I think I did disable it in the editor. But I was pretty sure the text said, click to disable. Either way, it ended up not being a problem. So now we just circularize. To do that, go to apoapsis and just hit the gas until you kind of see it flip around like that. Now, I originally tried to get a free return trajectory, and I did at one point. It takes a bit of finagling. What you want to do is, with the maneuver node, get your apoapsis to about 15 million meters, or maybe it's kilometers. I think it's meters. And then just kind of circle it around the planet until you get an encounter with the Mun. Now here you can see, I think this is when I get the free return. You can see my periaps on the left, comes back into the atmosphere at like a safe level, and I'm also like somewhere where it's good with the Mun. However, I didn't like how high that periapsis was on the Mun. It was like 150,000 meters, and I was not looking for something that high. So I decided not to go with the free return trajectory. I went with this one, and you'll see it's much closer. And notice how bendy that is, how much it bends around. If your insertion is very straight on, that means you're going to need a lot of burning to slow down. You're basically going too fast. The more curved it is, the more efficient your burn to capture is. So right now we're burning to, escape Kerbin and go to the Mun. And once the little green bar gets near the bottom, just slow down. We'll check it, and looks like messed something up. It's not close enough, so we gotta slow down. We've been a bit too fast. You can right-click the periaps, apoaps, a lot of stuff to get the number to stay on the screen. Then warp to periaps, burn retrograde to circularize, or capture. We'll circularize later. Our orbit is about 50,000 meters. That's a little bit high for the Mun, especially given we're doing this Apollo style thing. So you will, given that you're going to want to take off from the surface and come back, your lander usually, doesn't have that much fuel. Ours only had a little bit left, as we'll see, because the crossfeed was not disabled. So you want the orbit pretty low so it's easier to get into orbit and meet back up. So once we're circularized, I want to be on the light side of the planet. It's also facing Kerbin, which is very good for radio contact. Not strictly necessary, but just more realistic. So before you land, you want to make sure your crew gets over to the landing module. Once they're in, undock. You should probably check at this point that the lander has fuel in it. You'll notice I check afterwards, and it does not have full fuel. But if you can see the delta V in the bottom left, it's definitely enough to land and come back. So it looks like I have about 1600 meters per second of delta V. That's definitely enough. Minimum, I would say, is like 1200. You need definitely 600 to land, probably more. 1600 definitely safe. If you have 1600 at this point, good job. I'd say, you know, you should really be aiming for 1400 just to be really safe. In terms of landing site, just get as flat as you can. It's really hard to tell with the mun. But yeah, just look for something good. As for which Kerbals you want to come to the planet, if you're doing it this way with a 2-seat landing module, you'll want your pilot and your scientist to come. That way the scientist can reset experiments on the way down. You should be doing like the science experiments as often as possible, like in each new, you know, area. And the pilot's useful because you'll want him on the ascent upwards, because the landing vehicle is going to be the one that we use to rendezvous. The other one's pretty much just sitting there dead. And having the pilot enables you to use the those little buttons next to the nav ball. If you're playing career science mode, you might only have like the pro grade one or the stability one because your guy's not leveled up yet. Just use him a lot and he'll level up, and it's really useful. I'm playing in sandbox mode, so he just automatically has that. So once you get down to where the ground just looks like it's coming at you very fast, you'll want to start slowing down, obviously. I switched the altimeter to based on like the actual height of the ground beneath us, not sea level. Very useful on really bumpy places like the mun. Around 3000 is a good time to start slowing down. Really the later that you start slowing down, the better, the more efficient it is. You really want that like suicide burn where you know, just barely don't die from hitting the planet. Mine wasn't crazy efficient. You'll notice I'm coming right at like the rim of a crater. That's not good. So you can use the like buttons on the side of the nav ball to switch between retrograde and just stability control, and you'll want to, you know, avoid anything that's not flat. So you can use the retrograde to like kill off all the velocity. I like to just switch to retrograde, turn it off so that I'm just burning away the horizontal, or do the opposite, like point upwards and burn, so I'm just getting rid of the vertical but not horizontal, just depending on what you need to do. So yeah, it looks like we're coming in pretty good. Like 3 meters per second is like the max the Kerbals probably enjoy. So it looks like we have only about 800, 900 meters per second left. Sorry, I can't really read it very well. Of delta V. That's more than enough, and we're also going to be jettisoning the landing legs, so I'll just add a tiny bit. Another thing about our ascent, in case you didn't notice, we're in a retrograde orbit, or at least the service module is in a retrograde orbit of the mun, and what that means is the mun turns, I guess to the right. I mean, it turns one way and we're orbiting it the other way. When we left Kerbin, we got into an orbit that was like a prograde orbit, like it went with the turn of Kerbin. So when we leave the mun, we're going to be going the opposite way. So the mun turns really slowly, so this is not going to incur very much delta V loss or anything like that, but just something to know. Anyway, now that we're here, if you're in science mode or career mode, you would do your experiments, collect data and all that, and of course plant a flag.
He needs some milk!
So once you've done everything you want to do, make sure you don't leave any Kerbals behind, get back into your lander, and get ready for takeoff. In order to do this, we're going to set the service module as our target, and wait until it's above us. Now I waited till it was a bit behind us, but pretty much above us. That's kind of an angle I would use if I was rendezvousing with something from Kerbin. You see how far away it is? Not directly above us. Maybe even give it a bit more, like, lag behind us if we're coming from Kerbin. But coming from the Mun, the velocity needed to get into orbit is not as much, and the orbit is much lower. So we don't actually need to give it that much time for us to, like, because it's, you know, it's going to be slower for us because we start at 0 and we have to speed up to reach orbit. And so you'll see we're ahead because we didn't wait as long as we could have. Not a big deal. We can see our rendezvous is going to come up just within like one orbit. And if you're having trouble with rendezvousing, really the hardest part is the messing around with the maneuver node. But really just messing around with it, the only thing I can tell you is practice. Another tip, if you are ahead of your target, you need to get into a higher orbit than it, or it needs to get into a lower orbit, because the lower the orbit, the faster it orbits. So if you need to, you know, if it's behind you, get into a higher orbit, that way it can catch up to you. So now we're pretty close. Usually on the nav ball or on the maneuver node, I don't try to get any closer than like 0.2. 0.0 is like really good, 0.1's really good. Even if it's just 1 kilometer, that's completely doable. Once they get within like visual range of each other, just use the target mode on the maneuver, nav ball, sorry, and cancel out your velocity with it. And then once the velocity is canceled out, point towards it and burn. This is not the most efficient way, but it is super easy. So just do that a couple times till they get really close, and you just keep repeating this until they dock. You don't want to go too fast, by the way. 1 meter per second, really, is what you should do. And now we're putting fuel from the lander into the service module. Then we will disconnect. Oh, well, first we gotta get our guys over. Also, if you have any, like, science on board, you need a Kerbal to get out, take the science out with him, like on EVA, and then board the command module, like, on his own. Don't go back into the lander. That's just how you move science in this game. Now, to leave the Mun, you'll notice that the Mun's trajectory is kind of like down to the right on the screen. Since we want to go in to like the sphere of gravity, we need to lower our velocity relative to Kerbin. So we're going to be subtracting from the Mun's velocity, so we need to go backwards basically. So we are adding velocity up and to the left. So we're doing that behind like the Mun relative to Kerbin, and we're in a retrograde orbit. So if you were in a prograde orbit, you would do it in front of the Mun relative to Kerbin. So now on the way back, you don't want to time warp too much, because you might just time warp into the atmosphere and it'll just blow you up. And this is about when I realized I had no parachutes and I had no heat shield. So I wouldn't normally do this, but once we hit the atmosphere, I'm going to burn the engine because it starts to kind of tumble. And the engine has pretty good gimbal and the atmosphere is pretty thin, so it'll be able to keep us, you know, not pointing nose down where we just explode and potentially speed up. So, yeah, you should probably have a heat shield on yours. One good thing about that, though, is we are really slow. So, because we burn so much, so we will have more time to jump out because I didn't add any parachutes. If you don't want to right-click them, you can just press P when they get out and they will open their parachutes on their own. For some reason, didn't work this time. I'm spamming P right now and it's not working. And there was no button when I right-clicked them, so I was pretty worried, so I just switched back to the ship and got Bob out. Luckily his worked. Now switch back to, I think this is Bill. Yep. And I had to take it off and put it back on, so don't know what happened to him. Is it gonna work? Oh my god, okay. Of course it's gonna work. So not the best landing I've ever done, but definitely interesting. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching this far into it. If you've never tried this mission before, definitely give it a try. It's one of my favorite things to do in Kerbal Space Program. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, I'd appreciate it greatly. And I'll see you next time.